All right, and we're going live to Rob on the beach. Rob is our friendly ambassador from backpackercollege.com. Rob's family has a cottage right on Lake Huron in Amberley, Ontario, located minutes south of Point Clark and just a quick jet ski north of the Lazarettes compound. So, Rob, how are you doing today?
It's a great day to be up here and enjoying the beautiful shores of Lake Huron in a fine Canadian winter.
Awesome. How's the weather today?
It's probably about -2, very slight breeze. It's beautiful. It's sunny. It's just fantastic to be up here. This is a nice day to be this close to the water because usually there's some pretty severe, serious, or strong weather we get coming right off the lake. But today's a pretty good day to be walking up and down the shoreline. It's pretty comfortable.
Awesome. And how's the lake itself looking today? Is there much ice? What's the lake look like?
So the lake itself, it actually looks like it's kind of late November water with a mid-December shoreline with like the high points of the little icebergs that start forming where the waves lap up. So it's funny. Look, I would say characteristic of what this looks like compared to a typical winter. This time of year, normally there's a few rows of these icebergs that go maybe 1 or 2 rows out into the water that might span maybe another 30 to 40 feet. And right now you'll see, because the water's very, very high, this is pretty much the high point on the 25-year cycle. So this is the highest I've seen it in about a quarter century up here.
All right, that's awesome. That's a great lead into the class last semester. They were supposed to have listened to me about the sciencey stuff, like, what's Lake Huron been like, and that we are seeing lake levels were approaching these record high levels over the last couple of years. So they've heard the sciencey stuff from me, but we want to hear from you, like somebody that's actually living there and being out on the beach and have seen it for multiple years. So what have you yourself noticed about like Lake Huron lake levels over the past couple of years with their extreme high, and maybe even over the past couple of decades? What have you noticed the most?
Okay, so talking recently, what we've noticed with the water levels being high is anyone with a propeller boat is safe to take it out on the water. So you'll see here at its low point, probably 20 or so years ago, at the low point, there were actually, if you panned across the water, you would see from where I'm standing, you'd see about 3 to 5 massive rocks. These are rocks about the size of a car, and they would be just above the surface a few inches or just below the surface a few inches. So the locals, we know approximately where these 2 rocks were, the other one right out here. If you're new to the area and you move in here and you got a propeller boat, or actually any boat 20, 25 years ago, you were at risk of injury or maybe killing yourself by a boating accident if you didn't know that those rocks were there. So usually the locals go out and they mark the rocks for everybody. Now that the water's so high, essentially any small watercraft launching from shore, we have no concern about rocks anywhere here from past Lazarettes Place towards Goddard, right up, that's down south, and then further up north here to Point Clark and Kincardine area. As far as we can see here, there is no concern for rock today because of how high the water is, whereas back when I was a kid and we're up here, before anyone started going out, May 2-4 weekend, you go out, or a mom or dad or somebody does, and they mark the rocks with buoys, so just a little bit safer place. So the other thing we've noticed too is things like landscapes. I don't know if you can see this tree stump here. Over the last, say, 10 or 15 years, these types of poplar trees would establish themselves in a growing environment that used to be essentially the middle of our beach in the summertime, where we'd be, sun tanning and enjoying the beach. And so we had rows of these that would go out to the water, and we still had about another 30 or 40 feet of beach, all sand, freshwater beach, going out for a long time. And then as the water came up, the landscape was starting to change by trees like this and shrubs kind of settling in. Because the water's been so high now, it eats away at the root systems. Some of these trees themselves, the smaller ones, would wash into the water, also creating a bit of a hazard. But then those trees can re-lodge themselves further downstream into smaller creeks and ponds and things like that. The other thing we've seen over here in the last 20 years has been Phragmites. It's a foreign reed that washes in and again settles in very low movement water near where streams and ponds are, and they proliferate like bamboo. They grow really fast and they choke out the other landscapes. So we've actually seen that affect the beach shoreline in the small little creeks that come in, because this particular reed came up the St. Lawrence in the boats and the locks and things like that actually was able to establish themselves. This is from Asia. It took centuries to make its way here, and they actually found these, and it was creating a bit of an ecosystem problem. Even the local authorities there were a few, it took several years for them to define how best to treat those types of things. But those are some of the changes we've seen in the last 20, 25 years.
That's kind of spins me into two questions. One about Phragmites and stuff like that. But the first one I wanted to ask you about is just what has been the biggest difference that you've seen in like with the actual beach? And you've started talking about that, but have you noticed other changes to the beach other than the lake levels coming up much higher and you're losing a lot of it? Have you noticed?
Yeah, so great question. So one of the biggest changes, and some of these changes are both cyclical that have been happening for centuries or thousands of years that only as humans we've noticed in our lifetime. Other things are things that affect us more of a one-time deal, like more recently as a result of global trade, things like that with the Phragmites. So the more specific topical changes that we've noticed have been how the landscape can be affected just in its own natural environment. So what we're looking at over here, the sand has come in so much so that even between the fall and the winter, sand blows in up here. So this berm here used to be the high point where the water would pool maybe just up against it on a big wave and then would rush back to the water. So this was just like ankle water on a big wavy day. But now the sand is blown up so far, big waves come up into this fire pit area and they filled this up full of sand. In addition, this pathway here to my cottage, you'll see it looks like it's about 3 feet of sand on each bankment. Normally, that's about 6 or 7 feet in the air. There's been so much sand just by the weather, the wind, and everything blowing up these pathways that we've gotten a lot of our sand back actually from the American side. It just naturally blows and washes ashore slowly, but over a couple months. So you can get a dramatic amount of change in a very short amount of time, even 1 or 2 months, where it changes the whole topography of the sand dune areas. So where the high point of the sand dune is, we've actually had waves come up and pool rocks and sticks and branches where we usually park our watercraft for the summer. So that's how just some of the sand has really changed in just a couple months. Whereas we've also seen stuff like you've mentioned the Phragmites too, with those things that come in, somebody needs to deal with them. So when the local municipalities don't, we still have to, because it's a problem that affects the local vegetation, the local ecosystem that apparently over on the American side, they were dealing with fairly aggressively 5 years ago. They didn't have the problem proliferate as much because they got on the problem quickly. Because we were a little bit late to get on to how to deal with the Phragmites here locally, it took local citizens to have to kind of jump on board and deal with it themselves in the absence of leadership from the local conservation authorities or the local municipalities.
If you want to come in so you can hear me, I know that like the Maitland Valley Conservation Authority is in the area and they might be doing some shoreline management, as well as the Lake Huron Center for Coastal Conservation. I know they've been dealing with some Phragmites issues and how to deal with that in the area, well, all up along the Lake Huron shoreline. Have you had have they been there working, or has it all been totally dependent on like the local, basically the homeowners or the landowners along the shoreline that have been picking up most of the work?
Well, I think to be fair, it was an issue that was so big, affecting so many different small municipalities along the shoreline. They hadn't dealt with those issues before, so they didn't know how to establish leadership on those. So by the time the local people like us and our families who had these cottages for several generations now, we ended up recognizing this is an issue. We look at it a little bit more broadly, perhaps, than they did at the local municipality level, realizing that there's other communities affected by this, and they've already taken a proactive stance on how to deal with it. So we then followed some of what they had done successfully in other areas. We in turn lobbied the local municipalities to say, hey, look, this is an issue. This is what's happening. It's choking out the beach and creating a different vegetation ecosystem that we should affect those changes soon. So we eventually would get permission to use some types of chemicals that are more invasive than we would like to use. However, the benefit in using them was outweighed the downside of just letting the Phragmites proliferate and choke out the small creeks and ponds and rivers that are all throughout not only this conservation area and its authority, but the neighboring ones as well. So in our case, it was a lot of citizens would get together and coordinate and then essentially lobby the municipalities for what is the responsible way to respond to something like this that's different that even they themselves hadn't seen before. So that's how it worked in our neighborhood.
Gotcha. I just want to give a quick shout out to Jordana Garbati, formerly of the Laurier Writing Center, who's doing an amazing job with her camera work and even brought it in when I started the volume there. So shout out to Jordana.
Thank you. Hi, everybody.
Stay warm, Jordana. All right. So just a couple more questions before we lose the sunset there that Jordana's been picking up for us as well. What, if I was to ask you, and you can speak for yourself and for the other cottage owners, landowners in your area there, what are your biggest concerns about rising lake levels on Lake Huron? You know, and even, you know, what might happen to your beach, your property, or even your cottage yourself? Like, what are your concerns at this current time when we have these high lake levels? What is your biggest worry or concern?
Well, so that's a great question, and I think it's almost two parts to that one. My biggest concerns up here for the natural area, it's not the rising and falling of the lake levels, because they've been happening like that for thousands of years. So it's our understanding of how to be responsible and how to be respectful of what naturally will be happening, in addition to not making it harder for the natural system to thrive as it should, whether we're here or not. So small things I've learned over the years are like making a little bit of a pathway in the berm for us to park, let's say, watercraft. In a matter of 2 days, our whole path can fill in so quickly and change that. I noticed that some of those little changes that humans make to this beautiful environment, they're negligible. They're I would say in the acceptable areas, that we're not damaging it. And Mother Nature occasionally reminds us of how insignificant those little changes we make are, because of how quickly Mother Nature can change those things for us in a very different way. So my bigger concerns are things like pollution or people making significant changes to the topography. So you'll see here too, one of our new neighbors, well, they're neighbors we've known for decades, but they built this new cottage and they've kept a lot of the natural sand dunes and the berms and some of these pine trees that are here now. That's, in my opinion, a respectful way of treating a waterfront development property, so much so that the wind is going to blow in its normal areas. The trees are going to block some of the wind and let the sand naturally settle and allow the rare grasses that are indigenous to these parts of our waterfront to grow properly. But that's a natural treatment, kind of respecting what was pretty much already here before he built his cottage where he's allowed to. So that's a respectful way of treating it. If you go further down the areas in both sides, sometimes you'll see what people did was they leveled the whole sand dunes, they put soil on it and then sod it. And so it looks like a subdivision in a urban area. So it's not only does it stand out aesthetically here, it puts different grass that wouldn't otherwise be here. It creates a flat kind of golf course wind tunnel for the wind to come straight in. It changes the topography a little bit more than it maybe otherwise should. So preserving that in a responsible way might be things that we can do when we impact our community by building houses here. And then to make sure that from a pollution standpoint, we're not littering, we're not leaving nets, we're not leaving garbage here on the beach, because it's a backyard that is shared by everyone here. This is one of the largest bodies of fresh water on the planet. So if we take care of it, it's always easier to maintain a beautiful environment than to have it go bad and then try to fix it afterwards. So those are just my general concerns.
I'm gonna hit you up with one last question before we go, as the sun sets behind you there. And it's such a beautiful scene. I'm so jealous right now. Even if it is negative too, I would love to be out there with you. Having said that, and the potential of me coming up, yes, that's a self-invite coming from me, right? But would you recommend, like, just currently, and again, you've seen the ups and downs, you know we're at a really high point now. There is a potential for it to go higher, but on a very personal note, would you recommend, you know, anyone buying like a cottage, like where you are, there's yours, and there's a whole string of cottages on that stretch of Lake Huron there, just outside of Amberley. Would you recommend somebody buying one? Like, you're already there, so you're going to keep it and do what you can, but would you recommend an outsider come and build, or even just buy one of those properties?
So, I mean, of course, like if your family or anyone's ready to deal with maintaining and being, you know, a good citizen in any neighborhood, I'd say for sure. And this is my favorite part of Earth. I mean, not only do we have freshwater, some of the finest body of freshwater in the world. It's my parents, our family, when they bought this place and established here, they said, like, this is like the Mediterranean of North America. You have deep water ports that, like, ocean going freighters and ships and big boats can come in just 20 minutes down the road from either of us. I mean, it's an amazing part of the world to just have any footprint, whether you rent here, you enjoy here, you visit it temporarily, or actually own a cottage here. So I definitely recommend something like this for almost anyone. And also there's the supply and demand thing. There's only so much shoreline that it's, from an investment perspective, yeah, if you buy it and you own it and you take good care of it and you learn to love any neighborhood, this is the neighborhood I've come to love for some of the obvious reasons, as well as the community we build here. So I'm very grateful to have it ourselves. But of course, I'd recommend anyone to either enjoy it for a day, come on up, come nearby and check it out, or go to Goddard or Kincardine or some of the other small towns along the way, because there's so much to discover. And there's actually a lot of neat little pockets of the world that when you discover those, it makes it a great community, whether you live here or rent here or visit or just passing through. So for sure, this is a great place to be.
Well, I'm going to say thank you very much for joining us, and thank you very much, because I'm taking that as an invite to come up anytime. So thank you again for that. Thank you, Jordan, for being our excellent filmographer, camera lady for the day. That was amazing job. Give us one more shot of that sunset. And I'm going to say thank you very much again. Awesome. Thank you so much. And I hope we can get another episode of Rob on the Beach. Thanks.
Awesome. Anytime, Mike. Cheers.
Yeah.